30 years of investigation as a scientist have convinced me that the evidence is overwhelming that planet Earth is being visited by intelligently controlled extraterrestrial spacecraft. In other words, some UFOs are alien vehicles. Furthermore, it is clear now that the government of the United States, some few people within it, have known since at least 1947, when a crashed saucer was recovered complete with 4 alien bodies outside Roswell, New Mexico, that indeed the planet is being visited. The subject is a kind of cosmic Watergate.
In March 1983, I was working on a documentary for Home Box Office entitled UFOs, the E.T. Factor. During research, I was taken to Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where an Air Force Office of Special Investigations agent showed me several pages entitled Briefing Paper for the President of the United States of America on the subject of unidentified flying vehicles. The paper suggested strongly that our government has known for at least 40 years that extraterrestrials and their craft have been visiting this Earth.
Starting in 1976, Freedom of Information Act requests were filed with the U.S. government. These Freedom of Information Act requests asked for any documents that various intelligence agencies might have relating to UFOs. Over the last 10 years, a number of agencies have responded and have generated several thousand pages of documents. These documents show that intelligence agencies in the United States government have maintained an interest in the UFO subject and tracked it for at least the last 40 years.
Since 1975, I've worked with nearly 200 people who have reported in great detail having been abducted and having been taken aboard UFOs for very bizarre physical examinations. This sort of procedure takes place from childhood on, as if these people are being followed like a tagged animal, something of that sort. I've worked with Army officers who have been abducted, psychiatrists who have been abducted, scientists who have been abducted, police officers, people from every walk of life. This is the core meaning of the entire UFO phenomenon. They are interested in us and they are studying us involuntarily.
Welcome to Summit University Forum, where the flame of freedom speaks. I'm Elizabeth Clare Prophet. First, the official explanation. UFOs are weather balloons, conventional aircraft, or the planets Venus and Jupiter. Whatever they are not alien spacecraft. But secret government documents and confidential informants tell a much different story. Is the United States government involved in a massive cover-up of its knowledge of alien visitors from other parts of the galaxy? Here to help us answer this question, Stanton Friedman, a nuclear physicist and authority on government secrecy and UFOs. Linda Moulton Howe, award-winning producer of over 350 television programs, including a documentary about UFOs and animal mutilation called A Strange Harvest. Dr. Bruce Maccabee, an expert in visual optics and lasers who works for the Navy and is chairman of the Fund for UFO Research. And Bud Hopkins, the nation's foremost authority on the UFO abduction phenomenon, author of a national bestseller on the subject, Intruders, The Incredible Visitations at Copley Woods. Linda, Bruce, Bud, and Stan, welcome to Summit University Forum. Stan, you talk of a cosmic Watergate that spans 40 years. What's involved?
It appears that since that original crash recovery, which we'll go into later, that a small group within the government has made sure that it has used all the intelligence agencies to collect information that gets sent into the hub, the secret group at the middle, and that the public has only been made aware of the external aspects of that. The old Project Blue Book, which people were aware of, was apparently a cover operation. They were a place that people could report sightings, but their job really was pretty much to debunk. They weren't the ones who dealt with the hardware, with the hard cases involving, for example, the Air Defense Command. The only guys with the good equipment are the military. They can pick up anything flying by, they can monitor it with instrumented aircraft, they can cross-communicate so several different systems can get together at one time. I got some idea of the dimensions of this in the course of my lecturing at something over 600 colleges, all 50 states, 8 provinces. I've run across hundreds of military people who tell me bits and pieces of the story, cases that they were involved in which didn't get reported to Blue Book and about which they were told to shut up thereafter using national security. I worked on classified programs for 15 years myself, so I had a pretty good handle on that. The first glimmer I had of this cover-up was when I found the largest study ever done of flying saucers for the government, which isn't mentioned in any of the anti-UFO books, incidentally, Project Blue Book Special Report 14. If we see this on the screen, you'll see the cover of a document that covers more than 3,200 UFO sightings. They did an evaluation of every one of these sightings. This was done for Project Blue Book, United States Air Force group, by a group called Battelle Memorial Institute in Columbus, Ohio. They looked at 3,200 cases. Everyone was categorized. They did a quality evaluation of all these sightings. And the public was given a story that showed up in papers across the country. And I was shocked after reading the document to see what the public had been told. The press release was in the document itself. The public was told by the Secretary of the Air Force, mind you, that on the basis of this report, no objects such as those popularly described as flying saucers have overflown the United States. Even the unknown 3% could have been identified as conventional phenomena or illusions if more complete observational data had been available. That sounds pretty straightforward. Only 3% unknowns. It was just the ones we didn't have enough information for, so there's nothing to flying saucers. And they went on to say that soon you'll be seeing things that look like the drawing that was used on the cover here. And if you see one, don't worry about it, it's ours. That was the tone. The same kind of tone has been carried forth. The only problem with that explanation was when you look at the data from the report, here's a breakdown of these 3,201 sightings. That's a lot of sightings. And they were all investigated by professional people. They found that 21.5% were unknowns, not 3%. And that these were completely separate and distinct from those sightings which were listed as insufficient information. A separate category. If there wasn't enough data, sighting absolutely could not be listed as an unknown. They also did something rather unusual. They did a quality evaluation of all the sightings. Because the obvious response to those might be, well, yeah, but how do we know that those unknowns aren't just those 3-second observations at 2 in the morning by the town drunks? You know, a lot of crazy people around. They did a quality evaluation of all those sightings. What they found was the shocking thing, in a sense. What they found, as you can see here, is that the better the quality of the sighting, the excellent sightings, 35% were unknowns. By the time you get through the good, the doubtful, and the poor cases, we're down to 18% unknown. The better the quality of the sighting, the more likely to be an unknown. Exactly what you'd expect if the unknowns were something different. So this study raised all the questions. You look in the body of the report, excellent work. It's clear that they had a very good collection of very exciting reports. And if you even focused only on the excellent sightings, there were loads that indicate we're dealing with manufactured objects whose behavior clearly indicated that they weren't manufactured here. This study was done more than 30 years ago. And yet the public was told something completely contradicted by the data in the report, never distributed the report. So that was beginning of my awareness more than 20 years ago of the cosmic Watergate. Now, I'm familiar with a different kind of security. One of the areas that people get into on flying saucers is technology. You can't get here from there. It used to be a common argument. Man can't go into space. People here might even remember when that was thought to be the case. So there is naturally security about advanced technology development. And I brought along a picture of a nuclear rocket engine. This one very much like this, less than 7 feet in diameter, had a power level of 4,400 megawatts, 4.4 billion watts of energy, and something like this. This was a nuclear rocket engine that was successfully tested more than 20 years ago. Now, most people, the details of the test were classified. I've worked on a whole host of programs where the existence of the program wasn't classified, but the details were classified, performance characteristics of the engine. With flying saucers, what I've found is that it tends to be a black program. The total estimated budget last year for black programs, programs over which Congress has no say, and which involve billions of dollars, and where the public doesn't even know that the program exists, unlike this program. The total budget was estimated to be $35 billion in 1 year for 200 black projects.
That's astounding.
Yeah, for those who think governments can't keep secrets, let me definitely get rid of that notion. I've helped keep some secrets myself, not about flying saucers. But projects like this, that's not something built for Hollywood. That thing was operated out in Jackass Flats, Nevada. Don't blame me for the place. Successfully tested. This is hardware. This is nuts and bolts. It appears that we have pieces of extraterrestrial hardware that have been recovered complete with extraterrestrial bodies. It's a startling story. And I'll do one more thing about physical kind of evidence. A lot of people seem to be unaware that all over the world we have reports of things, flying saucers if you will. All flying saucers are UFOs. Very few UFOs are flying saucers. I always lecture about flying saucers, not UFOs. From all over the world, we have something like 2,500 physical trace cases where a saucer is seen on or near the ground, and after it leaves, one finds physical changes in the ground, the equivalent of burn circles, burn rings, landing gear marks, that sort of thing. And about 20% of those cases involve reports of creatures to go with the saucers, even some cases of footprints. That's from 65 countries. And it gets dull. You look at enough pictures and you can't remember which place was that. The same kind of physical traces are seen. Now, if the government has such data, which I certainly presume that they do, they're sure not telling us their analysis of the soil, their interpretation of how those effects could have been produced, the kind of things that any physicist such as I would be very much interested in knowing. As a typical physical trace, there's a ring there of soil. This took place near Delphos, Kansas. And the object was seen on or near the ground. It took off. Afterward, the soil was different. In a ring 14 inches down, the soil was different in color and texture from the surrounding soil. Now, you can see some idea of the difference. You can see in part of this. On the left-hand side of this slide, you see soil in which seeds were sown and where the seeds didn't germinate. That's soil from the ring. Soil from just a few feet away, the seeds germinated beautifully, no problem. I had samples of this soil from the man who collected these 2,500 cases, and you can see what they look like. This was the ring soil with water on it. It doesn't absorb moisture. Pour water on it, runs right off, which is very strange indeed. I've worked on a movie where we show pictures of putting the soil, just plain old ring soil, on water, and it just sits there.
Floats.
Yeah, you take the normal soil and it sinks right to the bottom. This is peculiar stuff. So I had good tests run. In this slide you can see the ring soil on the left, the normal soil on the right. They're obviously different in color and texture. When I had good laboratory tests run, the ring soil had a higher level of soluble minerals, calcium, phosphorus, potash, the standard stuff. So this is one direction for UFO research that most people have never heard about, but that exists. Physical trace cases from all over the world. Now, of course, the exciting part is this part of the story. These guys, and we also have stories like this from all over the world, and we'll get into a lot of stories. The first publicized UFO abduction case wound up with this bust being done from drawings done by an artist sitting next to one of the people that was abducted, namely Barney Hill, the famous Betty and Barney Hill abduction case in New Hampshire way back in 1961. Now, that case really got the ball rolling because there was a book, there were 2 articles in Look magazine, television movie came out, the UFO incident, and very intriguing to me as a physicist. I was an advisor on the movie, but the most intriguing part of the story was the star map that was seen by Betty Hill, and where a brilliant woman named Marjorie Fish built 23 different three-dimensional models of our local galactic neighborhood. A massive amount of work. And from that work, was able to determine that the apparent origin of those guys was a planet around one of two stars, Zeta 1 or Zeta 2 Reticuli. You can't see them from here. You've got to go down to the equator to see them. They're just down the street in the galaxy, 37 light years away. That's, just around the corner, you might say. Well, 37 light years, the galaxy is about 80,000 light years across, so 37 is next door. But this is a fascinating story. If the government knows where these guys come from, and you have seen some documents which seem to indicate that, then it appears to be, this is the little booklet put out by Astronomy Magazine that reviews this star map work. Very controversial comments from a lot of scientists. It convinced me that Zeta 1 and Zeta 2 Reticuli just happen to be, incidentally, rather special. Not because they have crazy names, which is true too, but it's the constellation of Reticulum, the net. And what's special about those two stars, it's kind of mind-boggling. They're 37 light years away, that's no big deal, but those two stars are 100 times closer to each other than our star, the sun, is to the next star over. These guys got next-door neighbors. We're so far out in the boondocks we can't see the smoke from the next guy's chimney. And those two stars are at least 1 billion years older than the sun. At least 1 billion years. So it wouldn't be too surprising if there were earlier interstellar travel, when your nearest neighbor is only 3 light weeks away, and where you have 1 billion year head start on us primitive earthlings. So we understand from certain documents that Linda has seen that the government knows that they originate on one of these two planets, Zeta 1 or Zeta 2 Reticuli, apparently by first-hand communication from an alien. Now that's exciting stuff.
What's really exciting is that Betty Hill herself is a very convincing speaker.
She was a social worker. Her husband was on the Governor's Civil Rights Commission for the state of New Hampshire. They came across extremely well. I was lucky enough to spend hours with them before Barney's death, of course. And that case set the right tone for abduction cases. I think Bud will get into that. But they're reputable people to whom something quite incredible happened. And where we've got the backup of this star map work, which is complex and exciting and intriguing.
Let me just clarify one thing. The briefing paper did not specify Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2. That came up in discussions that were separate from the paper. But Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2 has been referenced by more than one person, separate from what Stan is saying, and in addition to the Betty and Barney Hill case.
Well, didn't Betty bring it out under hypnosis?
Well, she was asked to relive part of the experience. They had 3.5 months of weekly separate sessions, Betty and Barney, with a psychiatrist. In one of these sessions, Betty is reliving a portion of the experience where she's asked the alien, "Where are you from? I know you're not from around here," the understatement of the year. Finally, to get her off his back, he shows her this, what I can only describe as a star map, a three-dimensional model about 3 feet by 2 feet by 2 feet, with points of light that were supposedly stars, and with different lines between the various points of light. Now, she asks, looking up at this thing, "Where are you on the map?" The wise guy alien says, "Do you know where you are?" She says, "No, I don't know anything about astronomy." "Well, if you don't know where you're at, I can't tell you where I'm from." End of discussion. The psychiatrist, who by this time his mind is blown because they've gone through the abduction and all the rest of this, asked her to go over the story again and gives her, asks her, "Can you remember what the map looked like?" Not knowing what he's getting into at all. He gives her a post-hypnotic suggestion. If and only if you can remember it accurately, please draw it later on. And she did, and brought it into the next session, and it was in the book, and this woman, Marjorie Fish, saw it in the book, thought, "Oh, this is a bunch of malarkey, they can't look like us at all, and all. But here's something we can check, let's do it." So she built 23 different models. It's a tremendous job, because the astronomers, not being excited about going anyplace else, don't have very accurate data on where the stars are. They know where to aim a telescope, but they don't know how far out. It doesn't matter if you're not going there. You get 5 different star catalogs, you get 5 different distances for the stars. So it took a tremendous amount of work on her part. And one of the intriguing things about the map is her identification of the stars couldn't have been done by anybody using the best data available when the experience took place. It was new distance data that enabled her to identify the stars in the pattern, all of which were sun-like stars, which is quite remarkable. Only about 1 in 20, there are about 1,000 stars within 54 light years of here. Let's talk about the neighborhood. Without 54 light years in a sphere around where we are, there's 1,000 stars, only 46 are similar to the sun. So that's 1 in 20, roughly. And yet all the pattern stars are the right kind for planets and life. And even more intriguing, all the right kind for planets and life in that well-defined volume of space that Betty saw are part of the pattern. So you got it coming and going both ways. That's a very unlikely thing if you take a dozen stars which are in the pattern at random, and they turn out to be only the right kind for planets and life, and all the right kind in that well-defined region of space. So quite a remarkable effort, and this booklet goes into that in some detail.
It's tremendous data.
It's very exciting.
Thank you. Is that all your slides?
I think we'll stop there. We won't get into the crashed saucer yet.
Okay. We'll talk to you, Linda. Journalists tend to be skeptical about UFOs and people who say they saw them. Yet you did a documentary investigating the link between UFOs and cattle mutilation. What first prompted you to do that?
It started with a phone call one cold, windy night in Boston. And on the other end of the phone call was my brother's excited voice saying, "Linda, a UFO has set down on the base." And he was excited and just beside himself. From my brother, it was unusual. And he was working at Malmstrom Air Force Base as a helicopter pilot. He'd come back from Vietnam. And he and others were at a wing party that night, and all their beepers, they carry what they call bricks in the Air Force, and they started going off, and men scrambled for the telephones and to get their various assignments. And the story that he understood, so I'm telling you what my brother told me firsthand, was that there had been an electronic intercept over one of the missile silos known as Kilo 7 at Malmstrom Air Force Base, which is near Great Falls in Montana. And a sabotage alert team, also referred to as a SAT team, had been ordered to go and identify what it was that was electronically interrupting the electronic security system around the missile silo. And my brother, pulled into this drama, is scrambling into a helicopter with security police to get to the missile site. And there's radio chatter that is going on, and 2 jet interceptors were scrambled. And while all this is happening, the SAT team, which has a visual now on this Kilo 7, is radioing back that what they are looking at is a football field size, which would be 300 feet, glowing disc hovering low over, but not on the ground, but above the missile site. And the phrase was used then, and I've heard it so many times since, putting out light that is brighter than daylight. I don't know myself what that means. And the SAT team radioed back that they were not going any closer than a quarter of a mile. And there was discussion about that they should go forward, and they said, if you want to come closer, you come out here. So with this insubordination going on the line, the SAT team sits there, the jets come, and when the jets got within eyesight of the SAT team in the air, whatever this orange glowing thing was blinked out. The jet interceptors radioed back that whatever it was disappeared. The SAT team is saying, no, it's there. We know it's there. It has just disappeared. And the jet circled. My brother is still in the helicopter trying to get out there. The jets go back. And as soon as the jets have left the site, it blinks back on. It's right there where it was. And the SAT team tells the command post, it's still here. It's just come back on. And it simultaneously began to rise slowly. And it was picked up on radar, and it Dopplered off at 200,000 feet. At exactly that same time, there were animal mutilations being reported in and around Malmstrom Air Force Base. And my brother heard about that firsthand from a flight surgeon. They were friends. A rancher brought a cow in the back of a pickup truck onto the base and asked the base to explain to him what had happened to his cow. and there was a very strange slit in the lower lip. It was what we call the classic, where an eye is removed, an ear is removed, sexual organs are removed, and the rectum is cored out. And the flight surgeon told my brother that on examination of the muscle tissue, it was so thoroughly drained of blood that it was a pale pinkish white, not even the color as you would find meat in a supermarket. So I was hearing these stories from my brother, and I had some newspapers that had been sent to me from my parents in Idaho and my brother about these strange animal mutilations. But I was working on human medical television programming. These were anomalous things. They were interesting and they were provocative. But when my family and I moved to Denver in 1976, I took a position as being director of special projects at the CBS station there. And the UFOs and animal mutilations were not in any way, shape, or form connected in my mind, and neither were any of the stories from my brother. It was past history, something that had happened in the fall of 1975. In the summer of 1979, while I was doing actually a theatrical docudrama, there were articles that began appearing in the newspaper about these mysterious animal mutilations again. And this file that I had had in Boston, I got back out again and started filling up the newspapers, and decided that fall that I was going to take a look at what is this? What could perhaps be responsible for deaths of animals that has been going on for 4 years? That's what I thought then, 4 years. And I began research in September of 1979, and within 3 weeks I had talked with maybe 75 people, ranchers, deputies, sheriffs, fellow journalists, and I was hearing one off-the-record UFO story after another. I'll talk to you about what happened. This is what I saw. I will not talk to you on film about UFOs. I'll talk to you about the animal, or I'll talk to you about a light that may have been a helicopter, but people did not want to talk and use the term UFOs or anything that they felt would embarrass them. Or in the cases of veterinarians, there was one veterinarian that I talked to back in '79, and one I talked to in great detail in 1980 on a case, and one in '82, who said that he would never talk on the record with me because he did not want to jeopardize his professional standing as a veterinarian, but he had no explanation for how the eyeball and an optic nerve was removed from an animal. So as I started into a film that I thought might be a contamination story, and I ended up 9 months later producing a film called A Strange Harvest, which was an accumulation of human testimony that seemed to largely be associated with circumstantial evidence of strange lights and bloodless animals with cookie cutter cuts.
I think most of us remember the articles, especially those of us who lived in Colorado at that time. They were going on all over. In fact, one happened right at the Broadmoor Hotel in the zoo there, and the prize buffalo was mutilated.
There was a buffalo mutilated in the zoo.
That's
on
right.
the way up to NORAD.
That's right. And we lived probably a few thousand feet from the site of that mutilation. And I can remember waking up one morning only to discover that the owner of the hotel was absolutely profoundly grieved that this prize animal had been mutilated. And it certainly sickened the neighborhood.
And it was classic. It was the cored out rectum and the missing eyeball.
That's
right. And we'll get into this, I think, in a while, is that there is a pattern. The thing we're talking about is a specific high strainedness of a pattern of cuts, separate from predator, separate from satanic cults, and separate from disease.
Exactly.
It's not only cattle or buffalo.
That's right.
Horses too, and
Horses, goats, sheep, dogs, cats, rabbits, birds, worldwide.
Reports.
Canada as well as the United States.
Canada, the United States, Mexico, Puerto Rico, Central America, South America, Australia, Canary Island.
We'll get to why they are doing that very shortly.
It's worldwide.
Bruce, as a scientist, how did you get involved in the study of UFOs?
Well, it first caught my interest back in the 50s when, as a high school student, I would read occasionally stories. I lived up in Vermont, and or I guess from here it'd be over in Vermont. I would read stories about local farmers or citizens reporting strange things that they had seen, And then at the end of the story about some very bizarre occurrence, there would be some mundane explanation by an authority speaking ex cathedra, saying it was the planet Venus or some airplane going by or something like that. And it struck me that there seemed to be a disconnect between the explanation and the description of the event. From my point of view, if the skeptics had done their work correctly and in fact had provided convincing explanations for all the early sightings and so on, I wouldn't be in it. When it comes to an explanation for a sighting, you can't be sure whether or not the explanation is right or wrong unless you have some independent evidence about what was seen, just by studying what somebody reports he saw in the sky or whatever. But although you can't tell whether the explanation is right or wrong, you can tell whether or not it is convincing. And the problem that I discovered was many of the explanations were just plain unconvincing. You would have to take a particular, very complicated case, perhaps describing a complex object that the person saw fly by and do right-angle turns and so on. And then if you explained that as the planet, in order to explain that as the planet Venus, you'd have to throw out 90% of the explanation and just grab onto the one point that it was a bright light in the sky, and ignore the fact that it made a question mark and did right-angle turns and then hovered for a while and then shot off at the speed of a jet. You could explain even politicians, I presume, if you were to throw away 90% of what they say. So I pursued that, and a little bit later maybe I can go into some of the specific details of cases that I have collected and analyzed that illustrate this point, the problem that the cases that have been publicized as explained in fact weren't.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the documents and the FBI documents?
Oh yes, I can.
Like 1,600 pages of
yes,
documents
well,
from the FBI?
That's kind of an interesting story because I was investigating a photo case from McMinnville, Oregon. It took place in 1950, and the witnesses claimed that they had been interviewed by FBI agents. And so I wrote to the FBI asking whether or not they had any record of interviews with, this is Mr. and Mrs. Trent, formerly of McMinnville, Oregon. And I got back and I put in a letter, oh, by the way, if you have any other documents on the UFO subject, let me know. That was in the fall of 1976, and by law, Congress had mandated that they had to respond to Freedom of Information Act requests within 10 or 20 days or something like that. So I got back a letter with a number 32,653 or something like that, suggesting, you know, they've got a big backlog already, don't hold your breath for an answer. And I said, we're working on it. And then 6 months later, roughly, I got a call totally out of the blue from an FBI agent who said he had been handed my request and had researched the file, and to his great amazement, there was well over 1,000 pages of stuff in the FBI file. And would I be interested in having him go through and select out what he felt was the best and send it to me? Well, I had no idea of what was in the FBI file. I was completely surprised. Nowhere in the history of the subject, that is the history that was known up to that point, had there been any mention of the FBI, except that in a book published by Edward Ruppelt, the first director of Project Blue Book. His book was written in 1955. He had one sentence saying that the FBI had never investigated. And I found out that, you know, it's basically either he was lying or he didn't know. In any event, sure enough, the FBI was called in to investigate witnesses starting as early as July 1947, called in by the Air Force for two reasons, basically. One was to find out whether or not, or at least the FBI was told that they were to find out whether or not there were any subversives out there generating flying saucer reports, I guess to undermine the U.S. government or something. A second, more subtle reason was that the Air Force didn't have enough investigators to go around. They were totally flooded with reports, and so they needed help. The FBI got out of that investigation after a while, but over the next 20 or so years, they just accumulated documents. Well, there were around 1,600 pages out of the FBI file, and it covered the FBI's point of view of the early Air Force work. It had sightings in it which had not made it into the open literature, which were quite interesting. One of the sightings reported in the FBI file and also turned up in the CIA file, by the way, involved Senator Russell, who was the head of the Armed Forces, the Senate Armed Forces Committee from late 47 or 48 until he resigned, I guess, in 69. And he had a sighting that occurred while he was traveling, taking a train trip through Russia. And he had reported in great detail on all these Russian technological developments that he saw along his trip. After he got to Austria, the first stop he made after his long train trip, he was debriefed by an intelligence officer there, and after talking about the radar sets and the bridges and the railroad tracks, oh, by the way, we saw this thing while we were riding along in the train, 2 glowing objects that took off.
3 witnesses.
3 witnesses, and the CIA and the FBI sort of worked on that jointly, and ultimately, I guess, threw up their hands. But Richard Russell was quoted as one of the other people said that Russell had said to him, "We have been told for years that those things don't exist, but now I know it's true."
Now,
and he was one of the senators. He was the head of the Armed Forces Committee. Ostensibly, his committee has authority over what Army, Navy, etc., do in terms of their ordinary, well-known interactions as well as their intelligence stuff. But he didn't know about it.
There's an important thing about the FBI files. There are copies of numerous letters from J. Edgar Hoover himself to people who wrote in for information from the FBI about their UFO investigations, saying explicitly that it is not now, nor has it ever been, the role of the FBI to investigate UFOs. Here's this pile of FBI investigations of UFOs. And so you have the contrast. This is where the Watergate aspects. He's saying one thing publicly, as we find out many years later, he was clearly lying. And one of the key documents in the investigation of the Roswell incident is a document that fortunately had shown up in this big pile of stuff that Bruce eventually got, which is a flat-out statement from one FBI group to another that the wreckage that was recovered was not that of a weather balloon and was being sent up to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and they await the results of the analysis. This is in this FBI document that's sitting innocently in this huge pile of stuff. And a second one was there too, with a comment handwritten from J. Edgar Hoover himself in July 47, right after the Roswell incident happened, saying that in a certain case, and you can't tell whether it's SW, Southwest, LA, Los Alamos, but anyway, in a certain case, they were not given access to the wreckage. Right, Bruce?
That's right.
And so it's very provocative. What wreckage? What are they talking about? And this is buried in those files. Now, incidentally, the other intelligence agencies were in the same boat.
What about the National Security Agency?
Well, the National Security Agency didn't release anything, but unfortunately for them, the CIA had communications with the NSA, and the CIA situation, of course, was much more tortured than the FBI. The FBI, I just wrote, send me whatever you've got. I didn't expect anything. They dumped 1,600 pages on me, ultimately. But the CIA, starting way back in the 60s, people had suspected that the CIA was perhaps running the show, and they said, well, we don't have anything. Then they owned up to having a document known as the Robertson Panel Report, and that was all they were admitting to up until the fall of 78, I think it was, when, lo and behold, as a result of a lawsuit, gee, we got 1,000 pages of stuff here, and they released those in December of 78. We went through, found that the CIA had been one of the world's greatest foreign UFO report collection agencies. I forget how many. There were several hundred sightings that they had collected from other countries. They also had some sightings from people here in the United States. There was in the summer of '52, the CIA records show that they decided to carry out their own investigation, and the first thing they did was they went and investigated this Project Blue Book, which was being run by the Air Force, and they concluded that Project Blue Book wasn't doing a very good job. In fact, the CIA document says, if all you wish to do is to determine whether or not a sighting could be or couldn't be explained, then Project Blue Book is okay. But after you've got a residue of unexplained cases, what do you do with it? These are the ones you should be working on. And Project Blue Book wasn't doing anything. All it was doing was say, well, we can explain these, we can't explain those, and now what's the next case?
We know what happened now, apparently, to the unexplained cases. That's where a super secret agency set up as a result of the recovery of the crash saucer, they apparently got the good stuff. They did the hard work. But let me follow up on Bruce's comment by saying the CIA also put out a list of 57 documents that they found originating with other agencies and which they therefore could not release. These were classified documents. You'd have to go to the other agencies. Now, fortunately, they listed all these documents. And every intelligence agency around was named. And the Department of State was named, and Air Force Intelligence and Naval Intelligence. The most intriguing group were 18 from the super secret National Security Agency. You know, NSA means never says anything or no such agency. That's the inside line. Their budget last year was estimated to be $10 billion, more than twice that of the Central Intelligence Agency. A big outfit. They listen in on everything from everybody. Anyway, there were 18 documents.
They're listening.
Yeah. Well, undoubtedly now. The satellite going over is picking up the transmission. There was this list of 18 documents from the NSA. So naturally, a Freedom of Information request was filed with the NSA saying this list was given us by your friends at the CIA. We'd like these 18 documents. Now, what was listed was dates pretty much, no details as to what was in these things. We get back a response saying, we can't tell anybody anything, go away, don't bother us. A page and a half to say that, you understand. By law, we cannot release any information about sources and methods about intelligence gathering operations. We go back and say, we don't want the sources and methods, just give us the UFO stuff, we can't give you anything. We go around. A lawsuit is filed, I mean, we appeal, they deny, we go to court. They still insist that they can't release anything. Now, so far, all we know is that there are 18 documents, and that they're being stubborn about telling us anything about them. Okay, then we try a legal ploy. We ask that they do a search. That's the first step. The judge asks them, they come back to court a while later with, yes, we've done a search per your request, Your Honor. How many documents did you find? We expected the answer to be 18, of course. 239. But only 160 are ours. You know, 79 with other agency. Fine, we say we'd like the 160, if you please. No, you can't have anything. We're going around the circle again. So we ask that this is the legal ploy really, because there is legal precedent for this. We ask that they show the 160 documents to the judge, because they keep saying national security, and we keep saying we don't want sources and methods information, which we didn't, just the UFO stuff. We had previously gotten other documents where most of the document is gone. But here's a small paragraph about a UFO sighting. They refused to show them to the judge, mind you. But what they did provide him with was a top secret document, an affidavit, 21 pages long, justifying withholding the 160 NSA UFO documents. The judge was so impressed by this document, which he saw in camera. Our lawyer didn't get to see it now. It's interesting legal proceedings here. It's the key document, we don't get to see it. He was so impressed by that in his 3-page ruling saying, yes, they should not release these documents, he mentions the affidavit and he says the public interest in disclosure is far outweighed by the potential damage to the security of the United States, or danger to the security of the United States, should these documents be released. National security and UFOs. We go to the Federal Court of Appeals. They normally take 2 months to reach a decision, a 3-judge tribunal, their oral and written arguments and so forth. They get shown the same 21-page affidavit. In 5 days, they agree with the lower court. The Supreme Court refused to hear the case. Naturally, a Freedom of Information request was filed for the top secret affidavit, this 21-page affidavit, and we got it. And here's a copy right here. And as you can see, it says top secret, and it's an affidavit, legal form and all that. And boy, were we excited until we started going through the thing. Because they go through some preliminary stuff. They admit that they're NSA employees at UFO conferences. But as you can see, Now I'm turning all this pages so you'll understand that I didn't just pick the worst ones, you know, when 80% of the darn document is expurgated, isn't there? And you can't scrape off the black stuff. There's nothing underneath. They cut it out first. So, a very simple question. Can we prove that the government is withholding information about UFOs? Yes, we can. The National Security Agency admits publicly and to a federal court judge in a legal affidavit that they have 160 of their own documents dealing with UFOs, which they have refused to release. Now, one of the skeptics has said you can't keep a secret in Washington. If you could, the president would have hired them to keep, Nixon would have hired them to keep the Watergate thing from getting out. I have challenged him for 4 years now. Give me any of those NSA documents. They're real. We know they're real. Give me a reasonably unexpurgated version of this. Nothing to date. Now, there's a postscript to this story, too. 23 of the 79 other agency documents that the NSA says they found when they did their search originated with the CIA. So naturally, I filed a Freedom of Information request with the CIA. Gentlemen, we'd like the 23 documents you have that the NSA found that belonged to you. 35 months later, Bruce said 10 or 20 days. Well, the CIA doesn't believe it, is sticking by that. 35 months later, I get a response from the CIA to my Freedom of Information request, and I got to look back through my files on which one was this, Their response is that they are happy to provide to me the first 9 items. Unfortunately, what those were press abstracts of Eastern European newspaper articles, which I presume the Soviet Union had access to long before we did. Their own 14 documents they refused to release at all. Now, I have filed an appeal, and I expect by 1991 I'll be turned down on the appeal. So we can clearly establish without any qualms at all 160 and 14. There are loads of others we've been turned down on. But there's no question, if you look at the distribution list on some of the documents, that all the intelligence agencies were involved in collecting information about flying saucers through whatever channels they could manage. Foreign newspapers, listening in on foreign military communications, the NSA's job, whatever they could find. It was a primary focus, and we're talking at least a dozen agencies here. Everywhere you turn, they've got documents. There's no question there's a cosmic Watergate.
I might mention that we've heard about the FBI, the CIA, and the NSA now, and how they're a sort of interlocking situation there. Other agencies, well, first of all, let me say that the Air Force, of course, was publicly known as the organization to call if you had a UFO sighting, and that was pertained up from, well, 1948 up through 1969 when Project Blue Book closed. So naturally you would expect that there would be a lot of documents in the Project Blue Book file, and in fact there were a lot. They were released after being sanitized. Names of witnesses and so on were removed. Those documents were released on microfilm to the National Archives in 1975, and anyone could go to the National Archives and read through these 92 rolls of microfilm, get the history, get individual sightings, office memoranda that were generated, briefings that were generated, and so on by the Project Blue Book men. The Air Force had not only Project Blue Book, but the people who actually did many of the investigations were part of an organization called the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, which you'll probably hear a term thrown around here, OSI, that refers to the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. They had a file on sightings, many of which did not appear in the Blue Book file. Fortunately, those records were also collected and put in the National Archives. So those were Air Force records, literally tens of thousands of pages of stuff. Subsequently, we have found out that Army intelligence collected material, thousands of pages there. I don't know exactly how many there was in that. Anyway, Navy intelligence has not come forth with very much.
They keep saying they don't have anything.
Yeah, we're not sure whether to believe them or not, because we know of particular sightings which have occurred on board naval vessels and so on. The Coast Guard has had sightings reported to them, including Coast Guard employees. These intelligence agencies have information come to them they do not take the attitude that it should be ignored, especially if it's their own operatives that generate it. CIA documents had reports from CIA agents. The FBI documents had a report there was by an FBI agent. They saved the stuff, and so we have, I don't know, a conservative estimate of maybe 4,000 to 6,000 pages of materials that have been collected, which up until 10 years ago, nobody suspected existed at all. And this, of course, is all independent of information which has been leaked, i.e. stuff that has not come out under the Freedom of Information Act. We'll get into that, but that relates to things like the Roswell case and MJ-12.
I just want to say about the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, I went under Freedom of Information, tried to get more of their files, because everything that was in the Blue Book files from them, none of it was rated higher than secret. But from the people I had talked to, it was clear there ought to be some top secret material there. So since it was declassified before being put in there, obviously there was a residue that hadn't been declassified. And I went after that. And there was a lot of double talk and communication back and forth, long letters in which they're trying to divert me in other directions. Finally, they agreed to give me a list of all the OSI installations, about 130 worldwide. They said they'd done everything for me that they could, which was nothing. And don't call us, we'll call you. The guy's boss sends me. This takes months to do this. And then we later on, luckily, were able to get a copy of a telex, a message put out to the same list that they'd given me a copy of, telling their agents that they would expect that soon they should be getting a request from Stanton Friedman. They gave my address in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada, complete address, under Freedom of Information for UFO data, and if such a request is received, do not, repeat, do not respond as required by Air Force Regulation 12-30. Instead, write him, and then the quote, what they told their people to do was if they get a request, write back to me saying, write headquarters. What they were supposed to do by the regulations was to get the information that I had requested out of their files, send it to headquarters for review, and notify me that they had done so, thus revealing the existence of this information. By telling me to write headquarters, they were bypassing that step, violating their own rules, and avoiding releasing information. So people have often asked me whether I've ever been bothered, and I'm sure, Bruce, you've been asked the same thing, and you too, but whether the government has ever bothered you, stood in your way, threatened you, to shut up or we'll do something. I've never had that happen, but in this case it's clear. They were illegally shutting off a line of inquiry. And if there's nothing to hide, presumably you wouldn't do that. So I'd still love to see those files. Anybody knows where the OSI files are? I want them.
I'd just like to say, before we establish conclusively that there is a government cover-up, that one 4th of July in the 70s, we had a speaker by the name of Major General George Keegan, a retired Air Force intelligence officer. And he actually stood on the platform of our gathering and categorically denied that there was any reality or validity to UFOs. And the response of the audience was simply laughter and ridicule. And
he deserved every bit of it.
He stood there and defended his position, totally mindful that he was not speaking the truth and mindful of the fact that this was certainly an embarrassment, that someone of such intelligence and background should be not denying this before people who are fully aware that there are UFOs.
We got a document about 1979 put out by an Air Force General, Carol Bolander, who had been heavily involved in the lunar landing program. A document written in '69 in which his job was to review Project Blue Book right after the lunar landing in July of '69. It was his job to review Project Blue Book and see what should be done. Where should we go from here? Should it be canceled, or are they doing anything useful or whatever? And in his memo, and we've never been able to find the attachments, there are at least 10 attachments mentioned in it, but in it he said, he's describing how if Blue Book was canceled, it really wouldn't matter because reports of UFOs which affect national security are reported in accordance with JNAP 146 in Air Force Regulation 200-2, I forget what the number of it was. And he repeated later on, reports which can affect national security are not part of the Blue Book system. This is a statement from an Air Force general. I found that general, he was still alive in 1979, and talked to him about it. There's no question about what he meant. There was a whole separate system. And we now know that Blue Book was the unwitting cover operation, sometimes very unwitting. So, General Keegan was following orders, I suppose, the classic line of somebody who lies to the public because of security. Maybe he didn't have a need to know.
Well, let's say then that there is a very important reason why the federal government does not want the citizens of this nation or any nation to know what is going on.
Well, remember, the first rule of security is you can't tell your friends without telling your enemies.
Nevertheless, it is our studied opinion that by this date of July 4th, 1988, there is something that we have to know, that we must know for our own vital security, for our own survival.
You have been watching the first of 5 segments of Elizabeth Clare Prophet's interview with Stanton Friedman, Linda Howe, Dr. Bruce Maccabee, and Bud Hopkins on alien spacecraft and government secrecy. Don't miss Part 2 when Mrs. Prophet and her guests will discuss the widespread abduction and examination of people by aliens in spacecraft and the early stages of the government's cover-up of its knowledge of alien spacecraft visiting the Earth. Check your station or local listings for the times. The preceding public access program has been presented through the assistance of Summit University, Box A, Livingston, Montana, 59047 1390. If you would like to know more, call this number or write this address.
I will never give up, I will never turn back, I will never submit, I will bear freedom to my victory.
For information on the full-length version of this and other Summit University forums, as well as lectures on the defense of freedom by Elizabeth Clare Prophet, call toll-free 1-800-323-5228 or write Summit University Press, Box A, Livingston, Montana, 59047-1390.